Let's do it.
No, so anyway, I did Tango and Cash, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, it was an incredible experience to be the location manager. I was terrified. I hired another location manager to work with me, a guy named Ron Quigley, who also was an old-time location manager who had been very kind to me over, the years as my being an assistant, and been very helpful. And he helped, he worked on the project. He let me take the lead, but he kind of coached me from the back until one night. Still can't believe this happened. We were filming in Irwindale, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, and there's these giant quarry pits. And there's a scene in the movie where there's this explosions and gunfire and these huge tractors with giant wheels and crushing things. And nobody had said anything to us, or maybe even realized that they wanted to turn the advertising signs along the freeway off because you could see them too much.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
we couldn't figure out how to do it. So Ron actually climbed the fence, got into one and turned one off because there's timers, and then went to the next one, went inside the fence and broke his leg.
Locations, go to 2.
This is V on 2. Go for V.
Hi, this is Veronique Vowell, and I'm a location manager. You're listening to Locations on 2.
And this is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes with the location managers that work on some of your favorite television, film, and commercial projects. Locations on 2 can be found at locationson2.com, and you can find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International, a global organization of location professionals working in film, television, and commercial projects. Visit them online at locationmanagers.org. On this episode of the podcast, we're introduced to Veronique Vowell, a location manager that started in the feature film world, where she worked on such films as Tango and Cash and Distinguished Gentlemen. After that, she made the jump into episodic television, where she's probably far better known today. During that time, she's worked on such shows as Grey's Anatomy, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Cold Case, Little Fires Everywhere, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder. Let's jump on over to the back channel where the real work gets done on set for a conversation with location manager Veronique Vowell. Locations on 2. Did I hear somewhere or remember reading that you wanted to be a police officer when you were younger?
Oh my God, you must have read yes, I did. When I was in junior high and high school, we got visited by, the fire department, the police department and all that. And I did. I thought that I would be able to help people. And that was what I was interested in. And then, at that time, it was probably, they were trying to recruit women, but it really wasn't a very, I don't know what the word I would use, but positive sort of career women at the time. And so I was dissuaded kind of from doing that. And I followed in the line that everybody thought I was going to be, which was a teacher.
But your family was involved in the film and television industry, correct?
My father, yes. My dad, who was raised in the South, had come out to California during the Korean War to do his basic training. And after his several years in Europe, which is kind of strange for being the Korean War, he came back to California and started trying to be a writer, which is something he'd always wanted to be, and eventually became a writer-producer of documentaries, of shows like Dragnet, and Adam 12, and Emergency, and things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and and that was his career. A lot of documentaries for National Geographic. He did various series for PBS. He was nominated for an Academy Award for a film called Say Goodbye, about the diminishing wildlife around the world, and he lost to Woodstock. So,
oh gosh. Well, I'm surprised that you even considered another career other than the film industry with somebody around like that all the time.
Actually, my dad never really pushed it. I never went to the set.
But he did a lot of great stuff. I mean, he did
Oh,
stuff,
no,
a
no.
documentary about John Ford and Mod Squad, and
He
you
did.
would just think with the profile you would have totally been, no matter what he said, you wouldn't have been dissuaded.
No, actually, just the opposite. I mean, I had several teachers at school who had been very instrumental in my early education, and I was always really good at teaching. And even as a kid, I would tutor younger students and things like that. My mom had been a governess when she came over from Switzerland, which is where she's from, to the United States, and so a lot of her job was as a governess was teaching kids. And so teaching just seemed to be the thing to do. And I moved back to Switzerland at just after I graduated from high school in Los Angeles. And I went to boarding school because my parents thought I was too shy to go to college, which is true. And I decided to stay on and do my university there and got my degree for teaching French and French literature and history as a foreign language. So basically teaching those things in another country, not in Switzerland, but someplace where French is not the one of the national languages. And while I was in school, I realized I hated teaching. So, it was kind of a rude awakening. You think from the time you're like 13 that you're going to be a teacher, and suddenly you're like 21 and you're like, oh my God, no way. But I really didn't want to come back from Europe. I was living in Europe and with my mom's family, and I was traveling around. But basically, at the time, my dad said, hey, you can stay in Europe, no problem, but you're not going to get, your monthly $500 to live on. And I then decided to come back to California. I came back and I had been back, not for much more than a week. And my dad was working on a series of documentaries on the Nobel Prize, all the various people who would win the Nobel Prize in that particular year. And their PA got a better job. And my dad said, okay, fine, we need a runner, someone to go get lunch, a gopher, to go drop off film, to whatever. And I said, okay. And it was so weird because I hadn't been back in LA in such a long time. And I'd only really been speaking French for the longest time. And I felt completely like I was in a foreign country. But I did it, and it was fine. And, it was enjoyable, but it wasn't like, this is what I want to do. So I went back to Europe again, and then I would come back again. And this kind of went on for a while. Eventually, I did decide that I actually had to do something. And my dad agreed to, as he said, I will knock on some doors for you, but you have to open them and walk through. And I was able to get a job, which was absolutely incredible, as a research assistant for the WQED series of National Geographic documentaries that were made at the time. And I worked with some amazing documentary filmmakers who unfortunately most of them have passed now, but have gone on, had won prizes, were really well known. And I got to do research, back in the olden days before the internet, where you actually had to call people and, interview people on the phone, or go to the libraries at UCLA or USC, or, ask libraries around the world to ship you books. And it was amazing. I helped organize a trip that one of our directors was doing to go and see Jane Goodall. Oh, wow. And to pack all kinds of, had to go and pack all kinds of goodies, because they, would take all kinds of things with them. Also things that the people needed in the community, food stuff or sanitary things or whatever. So it was great. It was really a great, it was a really great job. I really enjoyed it. I did for a number of years. And I segued from that into working on a series called Ripley's Believe It or Not, with Jack Palance as the host. And it was an amazing job. I was in the field research department. So they had a video research department, like a department that research through books and libraries and whatnot. And then there were three of us, and we would go out across the country, and we would go to the actual stories to see if they were worth, sending a crew out to actually shoot them. And again, this is before smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
This is before, real computers that you could carry with you. I had a typewriter. I had I had a beeper, and I would go on these 5 or 6 week trips around the country, Canada, and, by myself as a young woman, and visit all of the weirdest stories ever, because the 2 guys that I worked with, who were great, but they hated doing what we would call the special interest stories. So, some fascinating person who has no arms and no legs, but does some amazing thing, or, just those kind of weird stories. So I ended up doing a lot of those. But actually, it kind of set me up in a weird way for what my career became eventually, because I traveled so much and so far and in so many different places around the United States. I got to really know what places looked like, what architecture looked like, what the countryside looked like. If you talk about New Hampshire versus Nebraska versus Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really good educational program for me without realizing it, for my future career.
When you were doing Ripley's, I have to ask, did they give you the stories in advance and then you'd go research them, or were these stories you'd bring to the table and say, what about this one?
No, not at all. No, there were these in-house research departments, and then their stories would get vetted through the writing staff and producers, and they would say, here are, let's just say, 40 stories that we think have value. But before we're going to go to the expense of sending a film crew out to go and do these things, we want to send someone out in person to take photographs, to do interviews, and to write a report, basically, that says, Dodd Vickers is a great guy and has an interesting story to tell and does something really weird. And let's go and interview. You should send it, And then they would take our reports from the 3 of us, and then it would go through the vetting process again with the producers and the writers, and then they would decide which ones they would do, and they'd go out and shoot them.
What was the craziest story you ever had to go out and research?
Well, there's crazy, and then there's interesting, and then there's sad. So the best thing I ever got...
Yeah, what's your most memorable? Let's put it that way.
Well, my most memorable was going to Huntsville, Alabama, where they had these tanks that the astronauts would practice underwater, like doing certain things to... I'm not very scientific, but, they would learn how to move underwater in their equipment and everything, and I got to swim in the tank.
Oh, that's fun.
So that was fun. The story I told earlier, I did a lot of really sad stories where a young child was born with no arms and legs because of Agent Orange, a father who had been in Vietnam. And she ended up being a rodeo queen and rode horses in the special made saddle with the thing to direct the horse in her mouth. And I did a lot of those kinds of stories because the guys didn't like to do them. What I liked was I got to go behind the curtain, which is, I think, what I like about location managing is you get to knock on a door, you get to go see something that most people wouldn't get to see. You get to have an experience, in talking to people that are outside your circle, outside of anything that you may know, and you get to learn about people, and you get to visit, you get to experience things, which is, I think, a very enriching thing in life. I often think we stay too much in our own bubbles. So that, I was listening to some of the podcasts that you've done with other location managers, and they have all these amazing, anecdotes and things like that. I guess I'm not really an anecdote person. I don't know that I have, all those really cool and weird stories to tell.
I think I totally agree with what you're saying, though, because I tell this all the time is one of the fun parts of my job and the rewarding parts of my job is I get to learn a lot about people's businesses or industries or jobs and see places. I did a film where I was the guy handling a mattress store before we came to film there. I learned more than I wanted to know about the mattress industry and the ins and outs and the ups and downs and the bad and the good. And it was still fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think that, what was the favorite kind of thing that I did on Ripley's? Part of, I think, what it was is I proved to myself that I could go out in the quote unquote wilds of the world by myself as a mid 20-year-old in, the 1980s with nothing but, a pager, a camera, a typewriter, and a rental car. And I could find my way out there in the world and meet people I had never met and write stories about things that I had, never seen or heard of. And I think that it was sort of, for me, I don't know if I want to say a rite of passage, but it was a way that I could that I proved to myself something I guess I knew inside, but was afraid to really grab a hold of, was that I could do it by myself on my own, all alone out there. I think of so many, the kind of memorable things for me are things like, driving in the forest in New Hampshire in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard and, no GPS with just a map, trying to stop and see road signs to figure out where I was going. Those kinds of things, or being out in the middle of nowhere in the center of the United States, driving for miles and miles where you see nothing in any direction to go to a story, and being confident enough to be able to continue and not be afraid.
Right. Well, and I've been in that position as well, probably not as often as some other people, being a guy, but my wife scouts. And I know she's been asked to go to locations that maybe she's not necessarily comfortable in. I've gone to places that I look back on and think, wow, I probably should have had somebody else there with me. And here you were at a different era in this industry, which is still fairly male dominated. And I'm curious, you kind of were a trailblazer in this for people. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, as far as being a woman in this business, doing the kind of scouting you started doing, even though you were more of a field producer at the time.
Well, first of all, when I first started in locations back in the dark ages, 32 years ago, there were very few women. There were really, I don't know that there were many location managers who were women. Mostly everybody was men. The set was mostly men. And the treatment was definitely much more what you imagine from 30 years ago than how it is today. So it was interesting too, because the transition, which we can talk about how I even got into locations, but the transition from documentary filmmaking, which weirdly was a very woman-centric kind of field. I mean, I worked with so many women at National Geographic and on other documentaries in my early career that it came as kind of somewhat of a surprise to walk into a television production of some random TV show as an assistant and be, if not the only woman, one of the only women, and probably one of the youngest women. And I unfortunately had many not so great experiences, unfortunately, early on with things like, being made to work excessively long hours because I didn't really know you could stand up for yourself. Being made to go and, buy the guys, whatever, a bottle of rye, cigarettes, coffee, and they would go off and play cards and I would work. And they wouldn't pay for it, things like that. And, being dismissed on the one hand, but on the other hand, sort of being, I don't want to say taken advantage of, but certainly being made to do more than your fair share of work at the same time. So it was a very strange time, sort of being dismissed, but at the same time, they wanting you to do more work so they could do less work. Anyway, that's my experience. But one thing led to another, and things have changed so much. I mean, I don't even think it's comparable really anymore. When I was in high school, the women's liberation was just beginning. I mean, and women were just stepping out and saying, hey, us too. And between that and what we see today, I mean, for women, certainly, I mean, there's still a lot of problems, but it's hugely different.
Oh, I can only imagine. And you mentioned the women's movement at that time. I just did not just did, but it's about to be released, a movie that will appear soon on Amazon Prime September 30th called The Glorias, about Gloria Steiner.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah. It's a biopic based on her biography or autobiography. And, several different actresses playing her at different stages of her life. Looks like it's going to be a great project. I'm really interested to see the final result, but really fun project to work on. Very interesting. She came out, got to speak to her briefly. And you kind of talk about some of these things at that time that this was going on. Tell me a little bit about how you did make the transition into location management and what it was like for you at that time.
It was actually kind of a funny and weird story. So I was working for Ripley's for a number of years, and then the show got canceled. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Am I going to go back into documentaries in some way? Am I going to try to climb that ladder, or am I going to, I don't know. I didn't know what to do. So a friend of mine, Cindy, who was one of the researchers there, had told me some of her friends were doing working on a thesis film at AFI, at the American Film Institute here in Los Angeles, and they were crewing on the project, to help out the thesis project. And she goes, "Hey, maybe you want to go do that." So I thought, okay, why not? So I called and I went and I met with the producer. And it was the project, the thesis project for a man by the name of David Hume Kennerly, who had been the in-house White House photographer for the president of the United States. And he decided that he had wanted to get into directing and went to AFI. So I went and I met with them, and they went down a list of things that they were looking for. One of them was a wardrobe person. And I'm like, oh no, definitely not for me. That is not my thing. And then they continued down and they talked about props, like a prop master. And they explained to me what that was. And I'm like, no, not for me. And then they kept going and they said, well, we need a location manager. And I'm like, what's that? And they said, well, basically you go around and talk to people and find locations and take pictures and show it to us. And I was like, well, that's what I've been doing, basically. That's what I've been doing. I've been going out and researching these stories. And in a sense, that's what I was doing. I was going out someplace, finding something, taking pictures and showing them to someone and saying, hey, this is really interesting. And to tell a story. So I thought, okay. So I decided to do it. I told my dad. Dad said, don't do it. It's free. You shouldn't give away your time. You should be paid for work. All that kind of stuff. And I decided to go against what he said. And I said, no, I'm going to do it. So I did it. And it was a really interesting experience. One that I thought, wow, this is cool. This is interesting. This might be something I could do. So again, back in the dark ages, I decided to send out my resume because I had no idea who location managers were, what they were, how to get a toehold. So I sent out 400 resumes in the old-fashioned way, in an envelope with a stamp, with a letter that I carefully crafted to basically say, I know I have no experience, but this is something that seems really good. I got a lot of letters back saying no. And I got one saying, yes, I liked your letter. You're right. You have no experience. Do you want to meet me? His name was Jim McCabe. He was one of the old-time, unfortunately, he's passed away. He was one of the old-time location managers who first were in the union in LA. And he took me around for 5 days because he liked my letter. And he showed me what the job was, in essence. He was doing, I think it was Amazing Stories for Steven Spielberg. Oh, wow. And work, I just walked around. I mean, I just shadowed him. I followed him. There wasn't a job. It was just like he's showing me what it was to see if it was, he was really a kind man and he had no reason to do this, but he did. And he was then instrumental in getting me on my very first movie of the week here in Los Angeles. And I was unbelievably fortunate and got into the union, Teamsters Local 399, on that project. And basically have never looked back.
What project was that?
Well, unfortunately, I can't remember. It was all I can remember, because it's not on I never wrote it down because I didn't write down all of the things that I did as an assistant. Sure. But I'll remember we shot on Lincoln Boulevard in like the Venice area. And there was a car wash with a coffee shop attached to it, and we had a parade that went through the car wash. That's what I remember. That is the sum total of my memory of that show. And
That's pretty memorable. I've never taken a parade through a car wash.
And it was great, and it was a wonderful experience, and it taught me a lot. And I parlayed that job into jobs on shows for Stephen Cannell, for Universal. I was part of the pool of location assistants, at the time, doing things like, Murder, She Wrote and whatnot. And they had a pool of assistants, and we'd help location managers on different projects. And I just did a bunch of different things, and then eventually kind of segued into films that were being made here in Los Angeles. And I just had a complete mental blank on the name of the movie. Oh my God. Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell.
Oh, Tango and Cash?
Tango and Cash. Sorry. Wow. That was like, hello. It's early still in LA. And, I have COVID brain in the sense that I've been
right now. It's kind of, we're all shaking it up.
Been at home. Exactly. I've been at home since, March 11th when our production went down. Yeah. So I was doing Tango and Cash as an assistant, and I don't really remember what happened, but the location manager couldn't continue, and the two producers, Stratton Leopold and Larry Franco, I remember this vividly. It was the second floor of these weird offices at Warner Brothers, and they came to me and said, "Okay, so so-and-so is leaving the show, and you have a choice. You can either be the location manager, or you can tell us who you want to work for, and we will hire that location manager." And they said, "You have 10 minutes to decide."
Holy cow, nothing like a little bit of pressure on somebody that's kind of...
Right, so I walked down the stairs. I just don't know why I remember these offices were on the second floor, and it was like these rickety staircases. Anyway, I went outside. I walked around the stages at Warner Brothers. And again, this is before cell phones. Like, you could call and poll your friends. Should I do it? Shouldn't I? You couldn't do something on Facebook and say help or whatever. I mean, it was just me walking around going, oh God, oh God, oh God, what do I do? And I made the decision to take the job as location manager. And I went back and told them, and they said, great.
Were they already filming, or was that...
Oh, yeah. No, we were already only like the first week of filming. So, I mean, we were already into it. And, we had picked most of the locations, and the times were different. I mean, things are so different.
Can you talk a little bit about how different they were?
Well, when I started out as an assistant, I mean, it was literally a Polaroid camera, a roll of quarters, a pager.
Oh, a pager. Wow.
And a wad of cash. I mean, I didn't do location agreements. I didn't give people insurance certificates. You didn't have to go through this whole rigmarole. The permits were much more basic. The various jurisdictions didn't ask you for all of these, million different questions that they ask. I mean, things were different. I mean, I don't mean I heard Il's story on the podcast we did with Il Jones about how his first show in Brentwood, and they came in and were parking in people's driveways, blocking driveways. I mean, that we couldn't do, obviously. I mean, I knew better than that. But I mean, things weren't. Now it's so much more corporate in so many ways, at least the paperwork side. Yeah. You have to have email chains, and you have to have everything vetted by legal and risk management. You have to be I mean, we work, let's face it, we work for multi-million, multi-billion dollar multinational corporations, and they're spending a lot of money to make these projects, whatever they are, whether it's a TV show for Apple or Netflix or ABC or, a tentpole movie. And everybody's trying to limit their liability, their exposure, and so things have really, I think things have changed. Not necessarily for the worse, they've just changed. They've become more complicated. So anyway, I did Tango and Cash, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, it was an incredible experience to be the location manager. I was terrified. I hired another location manager to work with me, a guy named Ron Quigley, who also was an old-time location manager who had been very kind to me over, the years as my being an assistant and been very helpful. And he helped, he worked on the project. He let me take the lead, but he kind of coached me from the back until one night. I still can't believe this happened. We were filming in Irwindale, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, and there's these giant quarry pits. And there's a scene in the movie where there's this explosions and gunfire and these huge tractors with giant wheels and crushing things. And nobody had said anything to us or maybe even realized that they wanted to turn the advertising signs along the freeway off because you could see them too much.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
we couldn't figure out how to do it. So Ron actually climbed the fence, got into one and turned one off because there's timers, and then went to the next one, went inside the fence and broke his leg.
Oh, no.
So that was a whole other experience. But it's weird things happen. Weird things happen, but it was it was a good experience. Not for him, obviously. He was wearing a cast for a long time. But he said, hey, it happens.
Oh. I was looking at your IMDb before we talked, and I noticed you did a film called Distinguished Gentleman.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that one jumped out for me was I know one of the actors, Shy McBride. He and I knew each other from way back in the day before either of us got into the business.
Right, absolutely. Well, yeah, that was a movie I did. I split duties with another location manager, and I did the LA portion. He did the out of town portion, and it was. We worked on that during the why can't I think of the riots that happened after the Rodney King.
Rodney King, yeah.
For the day that all went down, I was sitting in my office, this in with a window onto the driveway at what now is called The Lot in West Hollywood. It was the old Goldman studio, and it's the middle of the afternoon, and I'm like, where are all these people going? It was car after car after car passing by, and you were like, this seems weird. And then I hear down the hall the production coordinator yelling, oh my God, everybody come here, because of course there wasn't really the internet or anything like that. So she had a TV in her office, and that's when we realized what had happened, and they made us all go home. And it was the day that the crew was actually leaving to go back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to shoot all the stuff at the Capitol there, because it is replica or a pretty close replica of the buildings in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's interesting. Somebody else had mentioned something like that. I've never taken time to research it because I've never needed it, but I didn't even think of where they might have shot this, because I know some of those scenes. I was like, can't imagine pulling that off today in Washington, but it wasn't even. It was
no, it wasn't in Washington. It was in Harrisburg. So it was. It was a good movie. It was a good movie, and it was a good group of people. And at the time, it was for a company called Caravan Pictures, which was a production entity through Touchstone and Disney. And I got to meet a lot of really great people that I actually worked with for, on a couple of projects. And it was a very enjoyable group of people to collaborate with.
Well, and one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you, you made the transition at some point. You did a number of features, but then virtually overnight, it looks like you shifted gears and ended up becoming known for episodic television work, which I try to describe the difference to people. And I was really excited to get you because you've done so much of it. Yeah,
it's interesting. I kind of, sometimes in your life, you just kind of make these turns and you don't really know exactly why. But one of the things was, it's I had bought a house in Los Angeles. My parents lived in Los Angeles. My friends were here. The rest of my family was here. And I was gone 10, 11 months of the year. And so I was like a stranger in my own home and a stranger to my family. And I don't know what, suddenly sort of one day I just thought, I think I want to try to do TV. And so many of my friends and features were like, oh, don't do it. Don't do it. At the time, there was this really massive divide between doing episodic television and doing features on a creative level. People really felt like if you were going to do episodic television, somehow you were, letting down the craft and you were not doing as, work that was as quote unquote important or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it as, maybe this is a way for me to like actually sleep in my bed and enjoy my garden and see my family and my dog, who basically barely knew me because he lived with my parents and,
Sure.
things like that. So I did. And, I really didn't think at first that anybody was going to hire me, because also at the time there was this disconnect as well with crews. It's like either you did features or you do television, which obviously nowadays is completely different with the kind of.
I was going to say it's totally changed now with the demand for content. Yeah.
Well, not only for content, but the kind of content. The
Right.
kind of content that we do today for television is, I think, in some ways can be more exciting and more cutting edge than what they do in features. And but at the time when I kind of made the transition, that wasn't necessarily the case. I was really looking at doing it for a lifestyle change. I mean, I wanted to try to be home more and have more of a relationship with my family. So I made the change, and, I kind of went from one thing to another. I really hadn't kind of found my groove, so to speak, in that particular arena. I mean, I was working, I was doing pilots, I was doing this and that. And it wasn't really until I did this really terrible, short-lived, probably never aired series called something Dead, mainly dead, mostly dead, almost dead. That's what it was called. It was called Almost Dead. And it was about these three guys. It was just it was like a caper kind of, it was just it never went anywhere. Anyway, I worked for a producer on that show, and apparently he liked me because I don't know, maybe 6-8 months later, he called me up to do a pilot for a show called Cold Case for Warner Brothers and CBS. And I couldn't do it because I was doing a pilot at the time. And he said, okay, but if the show goes to series, I really want you to do it. I'm like, okay. So I did my pilot. They did their pilot. They got picked up for a 13 episode start. He called me. I said, okay. I went and started working on that. And I did 7 years of Cold Case with an amazing production designer by the name of Corey Kaplan, who Ilt worked with on the X-Files, just as an aside. Mm-hmm. Corey is an amazing production designer, and we got to create, I don't know if you're familiar with Cold Case, but it's probably one of the most fun TV shows to work on, whether you liked watching it or not, because we recreated crimes from the past in Philadelphia from anywhere from 1890 through present day, as well as had our current present day story of our cold case investigators from the Philadelphia Police Department. So every week, every episode, we were creating these backstories of what actually happened. And we were filming it in all kinds of weird ways with, beta and VHS and old 8mm cameras. And, we were really like making a movie in a movie. And it was so great. It was so creative, and we had such a good time. Even though we did it for 7 years, it really never got old. And I just met a bunch of amazing women on that project. And one of the most, kind of important relationships that happened is the producer that originally hired me left to go on to do something else. And then a new producer came on the project named Mary Howard. And I have basically worked for her for almost 17 years now.
Really? You still work with her regularly?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
I did. We did. So she took over, and we did Cold Case. Then we did Scandal for 7 seasons. And then we did, intermittently, I did pilots and whatnot for other people. Mm-hmm. And then we did Little Fires Everywhere for Hulu. That is being heavily promoted for Emmys right now. And now we're working on the morning show for Apple TV.
Morning show is great. Did you do the first season of the morning show? I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but
no, I did not. They had some gigantic, as is the want in creative endeavors, they did a whole change of people on that show from season 1 to season 2.
Yeah, I didn't even realize they were doing a second season. I really enjoyed the show, and I've recommended it to several people. I thought it was very well done, but I just didn't know for sure.
And we were filming. We were doing a double up episode of 201 and 202 for season 2 of the morning show, when on a Wednesday night at 10 o'clock at night, my home phone rang, and it wasn't a robocall. It was the producer calling to tell me to tell everybody not to come to work the next day.
Oh, wow.
And that was the beginning of COVID.
Wow. Well, that's a good way to segue into the differences in the workflow for a feature film versus episodic. I did a similar show to Cold Case, though it was solved cases, notorious cases, and they were doing reenactments. But the workflow on an episodic show, which you've got, ongoing storylines and new scripts coming in, is totally different. And because you do so much episodic, I wanted you to take a minute to talk about working episodic television, serialized television versus, feature film work.
Oh, it's so different. And just to go back to Cold Case, Cold Case was completely made up. It was a wholly scripted show. It was, yeah. Okay, so the difference between features and television is vast and also not very different. But to me, the main difference is in a feature film, normally, not always, you get a script up front and you read it and you work on the prep of it and you see it and you know that, you're going to have a 100-day shooting schedule and, here are the days that you're going to be shooting on location, and you pretty much know what all your locations are, hopefully before you start filming, so that you can be prepping and doing all of the work that needs to be done to get things ready ahead of time. Episodic television, you're getting a new script for a new episode every 8 to 10 days, and you don't necessarily know what's in it. So you could be in the midst of, filming episode 2, where you could be on location for 5 or 6 days, while you're striking episode 1, where maybe you were only on location for 3 or 4 days. And now suddenly plopped into all of this, you get episode 3, a script you've never seen until the day it hits your email, and you read it, you realize there's 8 locations, and now you have to go out and scout while your team is working on shooting one of the episodes. You have to scout it, you have to prep it, you have to get it ready, and you. So it's. I always look at television more like it's like a train. It just kind of. It never stops. It just keeps going and going and going and going, and you just don't actually always know where it's going, because the writers, with all the creativity they have, you don't know what's coming, and so that's what makes it very different. And it can also be, depending on the kind of movie you work on, obviously, TV can also be much more long term, in the sense, not long ago, you used to get 22 episodes, or, when I did Scandal, we would have 22 episodes a season. That's, that's a good 10 and a half, 11 months worth of work, consistently in a row every day.
Right.
But the rest of the stuff is not different. Scouting for locations, whether you're doing a feature or television, it's the same. Prepping a location in television and features, all of it is the same concept. Pardon me. It's just, for me, the difference is the not knowing in television is, is the thing that makes it more complicated, because you don't know what's coming. And sometimes you don't know. Scandal was a great example. You'd get your scripts, and they would, let's say in season 2, they introduce a character and they say, oh yeah, we need to go to that guy's house. And you ask, is that going to be a one-off location? We're going to go to this house once we're never going back. Right. And so I don't have to worry about where it is, proximity to the studio, or because we're not going back there. So it can marry to another location that we may have on the day, if it's not a full day of filming. And then, suddenly in the next episode, there it is again. Next episode, there it is again. And then in 4 episodes, there it is again. And suddenly for 5 years, you're going to this one house that you never would have thought to go to for 5 years worth of filming, because it's in a location or a place or whatever it is, doesn't make sense that you're going there, and then you're stuck.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great thing to bring up that people that are not in the industry may not be aware of, is we are continuing to be sensitive to a specific location that we thought we were only going to go to once or twice, and suddenly it becomes a recurring character, and we're having to, pacify the neighbors and make sure that the homeowner is on board. And, that can become incredibly challenging to walk that balancing act between production and the location.
It can be both from, the perspective that a family was like, oh yeah, having one day of filming with a couple of days of prep and strike will be fine. And that's, some like vacation money or whatever. But now, hi, guess what? We want to come in 8 days again. And also you have to deal with the neighborhood. Will the neighborhood support you coming into their neighborhood that many times, with 150 people and, 500, 600 feet of trucks and then the kind of, circus-like atmosphere that we bring with us. Though who knows, with COVID-19, we're all going to be walking around with masks 6 feet apart with probably no equipment. So, we'll see what happens there. But it can be very tricky. And then, sometimes, in one case on Scandal, this one character, we were never supposed to go to, we went to their house once. We literally went there, every other episode for 5 seasons.
I know, right? Oh, gosh. I don't know whether I should laugh or cry hearing that, but I know exactly what you're talking about, right?
Right. The other thing in television that's different, I haven't done features in so long that I can't necessarily speak to it, but one of the things in television, we have air dates. So, especially if you're working for network television, you know that, fall and September is when the new shows come on. So you start filming or prepping in June, you start filming in, July, maybe towards the end of July to have your first episode on the air for September. And so there is there's a built-in engine that's pushing you forward because you can't. You have to get these products done and by a certain date, as opposed to with not necessarily always, but with a feature or with some of these, Netflix and Amazon and Apple shows. They don't necessarily say you have to be on the air on September 22nd. It might be the fall of 2021. So what that does is, you have to be able to shoot these episodes, especially on network television, in basically an hour and 8 days, maybe 9 days. So when you're scouting locations, when there's lots of locations, we had with the Corey Kaplan, my production designer on Cold Case, we always used to say, what's the dog, what's the tail, what's the flea? So it's like you look at a script, you'd look at a schedule that the assistant directors would put out, and you'd say, okay, so of these locations, what's the dog, meaning what's the most important location to push the story forward, to tell the story? What's the tail? What's the secondary kind of location? And then what's the flea, which means it was written for a laundromat, but it could be a printing shop, it could be a gas station, it could be a beauty parlor, it could be inside someone's car. And then working with the AD, the assistant directors, the producer, the director, to come up with locations that can be married or packaged together on certain days, so you can not have to necessarily move the company too far and, be shooting in the dog location, which is, let's say, the house that's going to be, 2/3 of the day of filming is in this house. And then, there's another scene where basically the crew walks across the street or around the corner. And then at the end of the day, you have a night scene, at the laundromat / hair salon / gas station, which is another 2 blocks away. So, it's a lot of not only looking for locations and trying to find locations that push the story forward, create character, create, help tell the story, but you're also trying to find things that make sense with a schedule and moving 150 people around from one place to the other. Back when I was doing features, and I'm sure things have changed, you would find that perfect location, whatever it was, the laundromat, and that's where you shot for the day. You weren't looking to shoot 6.5, 7 pages a day of dialogue that what we're trying to do in television. Now, it's a little different on things that come from Amazon, Netflix, Apple, because the schedules are a little looser. You have a few more days because there's no advertising. The scripts are a little longer, so there's more page count. So, and you're doing oftentimes a little less every day. So, instead of trying to push 7, 8 pages a day, you might only be doing 6 pages a day.
Right. And I've tried to illustrate this as well because I've done both. I haven't done as much episodic as you have, but working episodic, they're both very challenging in their own ways. But it almost feels like being on vacation when you're doing a feature that's well organized versus episodic, because sometimes, on a TV show or an episodic show, you might have a new script come in and you may have 2 weeks to find the locations, book it, scout it, do everything that goes along to organize the logistics, and then you're supposed to be ready to shoot.
2 weeks from now, if you're lucky.
Yeah, right.
I've been on shows where we're, trying to find locations to shoot in 3 days. And that can be very difficult depending on where you're shooting, because you need, obviously your audience who's listening to this probably already knows a lot about these things. You need permits from police and fire departments and cities and departments of transportation and all that. And bureaucracy can run slower sometimes than what, television runs at warp speed, and, city bureaucracies can be more along the lines of, an oxen pulling a cart.
Right. Do you have a specific example you can share? You've got that little bug, that thing that's out there that is a small little piece but you need it to make your day. Do you have a specific example that pops into your head that illustrates how you creatively came up with a solution to get the scene that pairs with it, but it's not what they were anticipating?
I don't know that there's any one that I could say that is so out of the box, but I'm because I've been doing this for quite a long time. I'm very happy to, and I've been always considered, a creative partner, which has been great.
Right.
So I'm not afraid to, be in the initial script breakdown meeting with the writers, and you're reading along the script with them and talking to them about everything with the production designer and the director, and you see something and you're like, right, well, we're not going to be able to go to the boat dock, down in San Pedro because it's going to be too far away. And what are we going to marry to it? And, I'll just come up with, totally, it's situational. I don't know how I can, express it in one particular location, but, it's situational. You'll be like, you see what the script is offering up, and you get an impression of where the locations are going to be. And then you just, come up with something. And I'll always, in a self-deprecating way, I'll say, well, this may be the worst idea ever, but what if they're not doing whatever and they're doing this instead? And, I can't say that I can tell you one particular thing where everybody went, wow, that was really weird. But, I find television, especially these kind of television shows where I've worked on them, for season after season, so collaborative and so creatively collaborative with the writers, with the directors, with the showrunner, with the production designer, that I feel free to offer up, whatever suggestion I think could help us in either, a scheduling way, or, a way to try to make the day, or a way to, again, push the story forward, tell the story, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah. And you have to crack that egg different ways for different shows. You did Grey's Anatomy, and obviously that's a show that has a lot of stage work because it's a standing hospital set where most of the action takes place. But you do go on location occasionally. I don't know how many days a show like that goes out on location, but
yeah, they go out like 1 or 2 days an episode, if that. Sometimes they don't go out at all. It's not a show that goes on location very much. Right. I did How to Get Away with Murder, and they were going out, maybe 2 or 3 days an episode. And Scandal went out a lot. It was probably half and half of a 8-9 day shooting schedule. We'd probably go out 4 days, maybe. Right. 5 on some episodes. Scandal was a more ambitious, I think, in some ways. And then what the limited series Little Fires Everywhere that I just did for Hulu, we were going out a lot because they didn't build, they built some of the main sets, but we were going out on location, 3, sometimes 4 days a week for the course of that series.
Really enjoyed that series, by the way.
Yeah, it was really interesting because initially they were planning on shooting, as you know, it takes place in Shaker Heights, and it also takes place in the 80s and the 90s. And initially they were planning on going to Shaker Heights to film quite a few exteriors, and it would have made the work that I was doing in Los Angeles less. And then during our prep time, as you probably know, Hollywood can be fairly liberal in their ideas. Ohio passed the heartbeat law about abortion, and our group of women who were leading the creative charge on the show decided that they could not go to Ohio and spend our money there to the show. So we shot the whole thing in LA.
The whole show was shot in LA.
Every single piece of it.
Oh, I didn't realize that because you pulled it off then, because I had no idea.
Every single piece of it was shot here. New York was shot here. LA, we shot the whole thing here. And it was really fun because Shaker Heights is a really interesting developed community. And initially, when I was asked to do the project, I got on Amazon a couple of books of because I'd never really been to Shaker Heights. I looked online, but I thought I wanted to get some interesting architectural books and some like then and now kind of books. And I really looked through it. And then with another location manager, Jason Kaplan, we worked on discovering the parts of Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area that could play for Shaker Heights, and, picked out the hero locations that we would go to over and over again. The house where Reese Witherspoon's character lives in Hancock Park, a suburb of Los Angeles. The character where Kerry Washington's character lived is in South Pasadena. And, other places that we needed to be able to go back to. And we developed Shaker Heights in Los Angeles. Well
done, because I had no idea.
Yeah. So, those kinds of things are fun. In that case, Jess Kinder, who is the production designer on that, who I also just adore, we had such a great collaborative working experience on that with everybody. It was really an amazing project to work on, and it was it was. I think we really pulled it off. I think it looks great, and I think people have really enjoyed it.
How quickly did you have to shift gears? Had you already selected any locations in the actual Shaker Heights, and then suddenly they pulled out and moved to LA, or were you still in the early development?
No, we were still in the early developmental stages.
Okay.
It wasn't too difficult to make the change. I mean, I think there was a lot. There was some creative disappointment, obviously, because if you had gone to Shaker Heights, we could have, done certain things that. I mean, let's face it. As an Atlanta location manager, people come to Atlanta to shoot something that's not based in Atlanta.
Oh, absolutely, all the time.
The scope of what you're going to be able to see is not going to be as big as it would be if you had gone to wherever it was supposed to be.
Right, and we're constantly cheating it. We're constantly figuring out ways to.
You've got to cheat it a little bit. So with appropriate set dressing, set extensions, camera angles, with smoke and mirrors, which is what we do. You can create something that seems really realistic and really is a character in the story. So yeah.
This is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, and you can find me online at doddvickers.com. For more episodes of Locations on 2, you can search anywhere you get your other favorite podcasts, or just go to locationson2.com. We've got all the links there that you'll need to find us online. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. You can visit them online at locationmanagers.org. While you're there, check out the latest issue of the Compass magazine. Again, that's at locationmanagers.org. Until next time, I'm switching back to 1.